Charleston, 1846. The night was thick with humidity, the kind that pressed down on lungs and blurred the moon behind a veil of cloud. In the quarters of the far edge of the rolling plantation, a woman labored on the dirt floor of a cabin that smelled of sweat, smoke, and the iron sting of blood. Her body convulsed, her cries rising and falling like the tide against rotting wood. Around her, the other women kept their distance. They had seen too many births end in silence. The midwife, old and bent, wiped her hands on a rag already soaked through. She looked once at the mother, who gripped the earth as if it might anchor her to life, and once at the infant who slipped out into the world with barely a sound. The newborn's skin shone wet, her eyes shut tight, her chest fluttering weakly. The mother gasped, then stilled. Blood pooled beneath her like a dark tide spreading outward, staining the dirt, seeping into the cracks of the wooden boards. No one spoke. The fire in the corner guttered low, casting the scene in half-light. Shadows shivered on the walls as if they too bore witness. The old woman picked up the child for a moment. She pressed a finger against the tiny chest, felt the faint rise and fall, then lowered her face close. The child did not wail. She made no claim on the world that had just taken her mother. Her silence was unnatural, almost defiant. The midwife drew back, her eyes narrowing. "This child carries poison inside," she whispered, her voice hoarse, the words falling heavy into the air. No one argued. They believed her, because prophecy was not rare in the quarters. It lived in the bones of those who had lost too much to call it superstition. The baby was laid aside, wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from an old dress. No one cooed. No one dared touch her more than necessary. She had come into the world marked by silence, by death, by the omen spoken aloud. The cabin walls, patched with mud and boards, sagged with dampness. The roof leaked from the last rain, drops plinking into a tin bowl like a slow clock counting time. Rats scurried in the corners. Outside, the cicadas screamed into the night, indifferent. Inside, only the fire gave it small, uncertain warmth. The body of Hannah's mother lay cooling, her eyes open, staring upward at rafters she would never see again. Two women lifted her onto a rough plank, carried her out into the dark, and left the child behind. That was the way of things. Life taken, life left. No ceremony, no marker but the earth itself. And so Hannah began. She grew in silence. Other children wailed when whipped, cried out when hungry. Hannah watched. Her eyes followed the overseer's boots, memorized the sound of keys jangling from his belt, the rhythm of lashes against backs, the way voices broke under pain. She said nothing. She played at no games, sang at no fire. When other children whispered stories at night, of ancestors, of spirits walking through the trees, Hannah only listened. The quarters feared her quiet. They called her touched, marked by something larger than herself. "She remembers too much," the women murmured. The old midwife, still alive and bent lower with every year, would shake her head when Hannah passed. "The poison grows," she muttered. But the girl did not seem cursed. She seemed patient. Her silence was not empty. It was heavy, like a jar filled with stones no one else could see. Even the masters noticed. "That one's odd," they said, "but useful." A child who did not weep, when struck, was a child they could put anywhere. At night, when the others slept, Hannah would sit by the wall of the cabin, tracing cracks in the wood with her finger. She listened to the sound of the river beyond the fields, to the lowing of cattle, to the distant laughter from the big house when guests arrived. She carried each sound inside her like a seed, hidden and waiting. The dirt floor remembered her mother's blood. Hannah, too young to remember the moment itself, still grew up with the knowledge of it, because the others never let her forget. Born in silence, they called her, and indeed she was. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words came short, heavy, like stones dropped into water. Her eyes were wide, dark, and old for her years. They seemed to carry echoes of the scream her mother never finished, of the blood that stained the ground, of the prophecy whispered by the midwife. Even as a child, she seemed less like one learning life and more like one remembering it. The Rowland plantation lived on cruelty. Master Rowland was known for his temper, his appetite for wine, and his indifference to life beneath his roof. His overseers carried whips heavy with iron tips. Every lash, every theft, every night of screams sank into Hannah like ink soaking into parchment. She did not cry, she did not resist. She watched. The smell of wood smoke, the creak of chains, the stench of sweat in summer and frostbitten breath in winter, these became the fabric of her childhood. She learned not from lessons spoken, but from memory carved into her body and her eyes. By the time she was 10, she had never been seen smiling. She walked with her head lowered, but her gaze sharp. She moved quietly, but with purpose. And always, always, the prophecy followed her. She carries poison inside. It had been a whisper once, but by then it had become truth. Charleston, 1858. The summer heat hung like wet cloth over the kitchens of the Rowland house, a place where smoke crawled along rafters and grease collected in the seams of the walls. Hannah was 12 a year. They sent her from the quarters to the scullery, small, silent, wiry as a whip, delivered into the domain of old Celia, the cook. Celia ruled the heat. She knew the moods of wood and flame, the exact moment a pot would turn against you, the sound a skillet makes when it forgives salt. Her hands were burn-scarred maps. Her apron smelled of lard, pepper, and something older than recipes. Hannah arrived before dawn, carrying a bucket that leaked and a face that didn't. She stood in the threshold, while Celia split a pine knot with one slow strike. The axe head bit, would answered, and the old woman didn't look up. "You quiet," Celia said, voice like a rasp on iron. Hannah nodded. "Good. Quiet hears." The kitchen was a body. The hearth its lung, the oven its stomach, the knives its teeth. Smoke sighed, water hissed, fat spoken pops. Outside, sparrows pecked crumbs and dust. Inside, the day began with fire. The scullery pump groaned. The bread mother breathed in its crock. The butchered hog still whispered its sweet rot. Hannah took it all in without blinking. Celia noticed. She taught without announcing the lesson. "Watch the fire," she said, dropping a handful of dried bay into a pot of beans. "It's a man. Praises on Sunday, lies by Monday." She tapped Hannah's wrist. "Listen with your nose. The nose reads what the tongue can't confess." Hannah learned the steps that made the house move. The master's breakfast poured into his mouth like forgiveness. The overseer's rations flung like feed. The fine plates warmed till they forgot the cold. She memorized times, routes, voices, hungers. She learned where the knives slept and which one woke mean. She learned the size of each cup in the big house, and how greed sounded when it clinked. When the men weren't looking, Celia's hands changed. The cook reached under the lowest shelf, lifted a loose board, and revealed a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Not a Bible, a book older than this country. Its leather cracked like river mud. On its first page, recipes. On the next, measures. On the next, prayers. Then, steadily, the borders blurred, syrups that soothed fever beside tinctures that stilled hearts, poultices for burns, powders for sleep, paste that turned a man's legs a rope. The ink was brown as dried blood. The hand changed from page to page. A mother's, then a daughter's, then a stranger's, all signing with no names at all. Celia touched the book like a cheek. "Your mother died with blood under her fingernails," she said, not cruelly. "You were born in that blood. You don't run from it. You learn what it means." Hannah did not answer. Celia opened a drawer beneath the grinding stone and set down 3 things. A root like knotted bone, seeds glossy as a raven's eye, leaves that smelled of church flowers turned bitter in heat. "Jimson," Celia said, pinching the seeds between fingers that no longer felt fire. "Sleep and storms. Makes a fool sing, makes a cruel man forget his hands." She tapped the leaves. "Oleander. Pretty as a bride, mean as a sermon." She sliced the root. "It's milk bled. Cassava. This flesh feeds. Its skin kills." Hannah leaned closer. The air around the table thickened with meanings. "Poison can heal," Celia murmured, grinding slow. "Food can kill. Ain't no line but the hand that measures and the heart that decides." They spoke little after that. The work required both. Hannah learned to wash plants without washing them empty. She learned to dry leaves in the attic where the sun baked secrets into wood. She learned that a mortar could sing if your rhythm was right, and that powders were never to dust the air like gossip, only to fall heavy, obedient to gravity and need. When the master's wife demanded syllabub, Celia taught Hannah to whip cream until it held the peaks of a lie. When the overseers tore flesh from roast, Celia taught which glaze had bitterness and which invited it. On nights the men drank rum until their tongues went velvet. Celia watched their cups and then turned to Hannah with a look that said, "Remember." The kitchen kept its own ledgers, not the tidy books of the big house, heavy with acreage and inventory. These were written in smells, burns, sickbeds, secrets. A ring of salt tossed over a threshold when Ward the overseer spat blood for 3 days and blamed the swamp air. A spoon of honey cut with bark for Ellie, who coughed the color of rust and needed sleep deeper than prayer. A thread of hair braided inside a cloth sachet left behind the flour barrel when a visiting cousin's hand stayed too long on the young one's waists. Celia's ledger had no numbers, only balances. "Never make a thing you can't carry," Celia told Hannah, rolling pace into beads small as tears. "And carry it so close no thief can find it." She showed her how to soften beeswax and roll it warm around a pinch of darkness, how to press each capsule flat, then round again until it looked like nothing at all. She showed how to cut a hem, stitch it closed with room enough for a secret. She loosened Hannah's hair, thick and stubborn, and had 3 beads at the roots. "Beneath your skin," Celia whispered, palms at Hannah's temples, her breath part pepper, part prayer. "Beneath your name." There were rules, and they sound like scripture. Don't touch your eyes after nightshade. Don't boil oleander in iron. Don't taste unless you're ready to be carried. Don't speak the plant's name in a room with hunger in it. Don't act on anger that's still hot. Let it cool. Let it cure. When the house slept, Celia read the book aloud, not loud enough for walls to learn. The words were plain as measurements, then turned, without notice, into memory. 2 leaves, never 3. Seeds ground with salt stay longer in the mouth. Hide the bitter with sweet. Hide yourself with silence. Between lines, Celia hummed fragments of some older language the city could not bleach. Hannah felt the hum in her bones and in the scar of her beginning. Outside, Charleston rotted and glittered with equal devotion. The wharf reeked of fish and sugar. Market stalls dumped oyster shells that cut the feet of anyone barefoot enough to matter. In parlors, ladies pinned camellias over trembling bosoms and pretended they did not hear cries from alleys. In the kitchen, Celia cut limes for punch and skinned truth from fruit with the same knife. Visitors laughed from the dining room. The floor under Hannah's saws told her who paced above. The long drag of Master Roland's drunk stride, the sharp military click of a judge's heel, the confident thud of a trader who counted souls like coins. Plates went up shining. Plates returned with bones gnawed smooth. Hannah wiped each one clean and watched the wine rings on crystal fade like names. Not all lessons were mixtures. Some were weather. Celia could feel a storm through the stove bricks before thunder confessed itself. She could tell sickness had entered a room by the way heat held the corners. "Air changes before a body does," she said, letting a spoon rest. "So does a house. So does a man." Hannah practiced on the edges of things. A sugared almond dusted with a hush for a rooster that tore at ankles. A fly drowned in a cup to see what swirl carried blame. A curl of bark slipped under a bully's plate, so his hand shook too much to strike that week. No one looked at her. No one ever had. That was her mercy and her weapon, both. The first time Celia bled in front of the hearth and did not stop, she laughed at the cloth, then at the blood, then at the notion of quitting. "Old engine stall," she said, binding herself tight. "But as long as the fire eats, we feed it." She pointed with her chin toward the loosened board. "If I go before you're done learning, you'll know where we kept the names." Hannah said, "I will remember." She meant the measures. She meant more. On Sundays, when the rowboats on the river cut hymns into water and the city perfumed itself for God, Celia made a stew that tasted like patience. Neck bones, onion ends, beans that let go of their hardness only by slow degrees. She stirred until the kitchen was a clock, and as the stew thickened, she spoke the line that sealed every lesson and set its fuse. "Poison can heal," Celia said, laying her palm over the old leather book. Food can kill. The difference is time. Hannah tucked the sentence under her skin beside the wax beads, beside the dark seeds, beside the silence she had worn since birth. When she stepped back into the corridor with a tray steady as a promise, the walls seemed to lean close to listen to her carry what they would never see. And in the reflection of a polished spoon, a girl's face looked back, calm, marked, and patient as a blade wrapped in cloth, waiting for a hand that knew when to open it. Charleston, 1862. The war thundered in distant states. But on the rolling plantation, the world went on as if nothing changed. Cotton still bowed heavy in the fields. Overseers still struck flesh with whips that cracked like rifles. And in the kitchens, Hannah moved like silence itself, obedient, invisible, patient. She had learned long ago that vengeance ripens slower than crops. Celia's lessons burned beneath her skin. Powders and wax beads, roots dried beneath rafters, poisons hidden in hems and braids. For years she carried them not as weapons, but as seeds. She waited for the season when the soil of cruelty was ready to be turned. It came in whispers. Master Roland would host a Thanksgiving feast. He would invite his overseers, his cousins, the men who strutted like lords across the blood-soaked soil. They would eat, they would drink, and they would laugh at the war, confident that no rebellion could reach them in their fortress of smoke and cotton. Hannah listened from the corner of the kitchen, her face lowered as always, her hands busy at the grindstone. The words passed between them like wine. Feast, rum, roast, celebration. That night, she returned to her corner in the quarters. The walls remembered her mother's blood. The floor remembered the chains. She remembered Celia's voice. Poison can heal. Food can kill. The difference is time. She laid out the tools in silence. Wax beads softened near the hearth flame. Beneath her dress, a hidden pouch carried dried Jimson wheat, oleander leaves ground fine as dust, and bark that turned wine into a storm inside the veins. She rolled them carefully, pressing the powder into capsules that could vanish in broth, rum, or flesh. She slipped them into the seams of her hem, into the folds of her headscarf, into the thick of her hair. Every part of her body became a vessel of silence and death. The plantation prepared. The kitchen swelled with smells meant to disguise hunger. Turkey fat dripping into fire, cinnamon cracked open for pies, rum boiling with sugar. The overseers came in and out, their boots striking the stones, their laughter thick with cruelty. They saw only a silent girl stirring pots. They did not see the book behind her eyes, the ledger of every lash, every theft, every body left in the swamp. On the eve of the feast, Hannah tested her hands. She measured without scales, ground powders until they whispered fine, tasted bitterness on the tip of her tongue, and held it until her stomach twisted. She knew then that the balance was true. The day arrived. The sun burned low, a copper coin sinking behind the fields. Guests arrived in boots polished like glass, their voices booming through the yard. Hannah served with her eyes lowered, moving trays, carrying jugs, setting plates with the precision of a blade slipping between ribs. The kitchen was alive with motion, knives clattering, with splitting ovens groaning with heat. Celia's old book rested hidden under the lowest shelf, its pages heavy with grease and secrets. Hannah touched it once before leaving, pressing her palm against the cracked leather. She whispered a single word, not prayer, not plea, only memory, mother. Then she went. In her body, silence carried capsules of death. In her hands, obedience carried spoons of poison. She moved like water through the house, unnoticed, unavoidable. Rum foamed in cups. She leaned near, poured the mixture in. Meat roasted fat and red. She brushed the glaze and let the dust fall. Pies cooled on the sill. She cut them, letting sweetness cover bitterness. Even the water in pitchers carried a memory of leaves. The air thickened. Guests laughed. Candles burned higher. The big house smelled of rosemary and roasted flesh, but beneath it ran a darker perfume. Oleander, Jimson wheat, silence. The walls knew. They had soaked too much blood to ignore the truth. Outside, the moon rose thin as a blade. Inside, Hannah walked barefoot across the kitchen floor, her head high for the first time. Every step carried her closer to the moment when silence would speak and poison would become freedom. She placed the last dish upon the table. 10 overseers leaned back in their chairs, their mouths wet with grease, their hands heavy with rum. Master Roland raised his cup, boasting of the war of his acres, of his power. Hannah stood behind him, her eyes wide and calm. The night was ready. Charleston, Thanksgiving night. Wind moved through the cane like a shiver under skin, and the Roland house swelled with heat and boasting. In the dining room, candles made halos over crystal and fat, over men whose hands had learned only to take. In the kitchen, embers glowed the color of old wounds. Hannah stepped from that glow into their light, and did not blink. They ate. They laughed. Grease ran down beards and onto collars. Knives flashed, not as weapons but as habits. The first overseer dragged crust through gravy and winked at Hannah without seeing her. She set down a pitcher. The room smelled of clove and meat and rum. Beneath it, a second scent coiled, leaf, sap, bitter milk. Too delicate for men drunk on themselves. She moved behind Master Roland's chair. The brass studs in its leather back caught firelight like small coins. He was telling a story about a hound that wouldn't obey. He made the gesture with his hands. 2 short jerks, the beat of a rope tightening, and the table shouted approval. Hannah tilted the jug. Rum kissed his cup. Rum swallowed a darkness no one named. In the kitchen, the clock over the hearth did its slow, obedient work. Tick, air in her lungs. Tick, the book beneath the shelf like a buried heart. Tick, Celia's voice. The difference is time. Hannah set out the last platter, touched the handle to know its heat, and carried it through. 10 overseers, shoulders loosened, mouths wet. 10 men whose boots had stamped out births and names. Their knives scraped plates like saws. She walked among them barefoot, so their floorboard would feel what was coming. As she passed, she let a spoonful fall to a plate. A drop beat into a cup, a brush glide across meat. The gestures were domestic, almost tender. The gestures were a verdict. She felt it the way a river feels rain upstream, a change long before the surface shows it. A first cough across the table, muffled and dismissed. A hand to a collar, tugging, as though the shirt had learned to strangle. A laugh that failed halfway and became a rasp. She did not look. She refilled a glass, cut a slice, wiped the rim with a clean cloth. A second cough answered the first, sharp as knuckles on bone. Night pushed its face against the window panes. The wind shifted. The candles drew thin blue tongues, as if trying to taste the truth. The youngest overseer, red-cheeked, loud, lifted his cup to toast a master. His arm trembled. The cup tapped his teeth. Only then did his eyes find Hannah's. She gave him nothing. He drank anyway, because a man like him would rather swallow his own death than break his habit of wanting. He gagged. The sound was small, like a cork refusing a bottle. Then his chair scraped hard. His hand flew to his throat. 2 men laughed, wine in their noses, meat in their teeth, until laughter could no longer be found. Their faces dimpled in the wrong places. Lips whitened. Sweat blossomed through linen like secrets. Hannah stepped back, so their bodies would have room to learn. Someone reached for water. She gave it to him, because mercy has many faces. The water carried a whisper of relief. He swallowed hard, and his eyes went wide at a horizon only he could see. A spoon fell and rang like a bell announcing service. No one rose. Master Roland lasted longer. His belly had eaten well on the labor of others. It fought to keep its seat. He swore at his body the way he swore at mules. He tried to stand, failed, tried again, managed a half-rise that threw hot gravy into his lap, roared, and clutched the table until the silver trembled. The first man dropped to his knees and crawled, habit finding him even now, toward the master's boot. He reached it, kissed leather out of a lifetime's practice, and died there with the taste still in his mouth. A chair smashed backward. A man fell against the wall, left a smear that could have been wine. Another lurched for the door, his legs refusing. He hit the frame shoulder first and hung there. The house groaned as if remembering every scream it had swallowed. "Get," Roland said, and the word broke like rotten wood. He looked up at Hannah as if she were late with a dish. He reached for his cup. His hand shook, so finally it made a music of glass. The cup slid from his fingers and shattered, rum in shards, and the smell of sugar turning to sickness in the air. Hannah set down her tray. She stood at the head of the table, where none of them had ever allowed her to be. Candles made mirrors in her eyes. In one, she saw the room as it had been, meat, steam, men. In the other, she saw what was becoming. Foam, fists, silence. Girl, someone hissed, a last reflex. Water. She spoke then, the first word she had given them in years. No, just that. A hammer on a nail driven to the head. He tried to curse her. His tongue thickened into a useless animal. He coughed, and white froth flecked his lip, a lace he had not ordered. He slapped the table as if to bargain with wood. Hannah walked to the window and unlatched it. Night came in, cool and honest. She wanted the world to witness. She wanted the river to carry the sound. A man at the end of the table began to sing a hymn by accident. Just the two opening notes he had learned to crawl beneath, before his voice snapped and broke into breathless gulps. Another's eyes rolled, showing whites. Another tried to spit his poison out, and found it was already within his blood, already wearing his name. Celia had said, "Hide the bitter with sweet. Hide yourself with silence." Hannah had done both so well that only now, watching them fail at breathing, did she feel how loud her quiet had been. Roland's hand slapped the cloth again. He reached for a knife, remembered it was for meat, not men, and laughed once, a sound like a hinge. He fell back. The chair legs skittered. His mouth foamed. He swallowed noise and found only more of it. Master. Someone croaked, but the word had lost its owner. It hung between them like a coat with no body to warm. Hannah put her palm on the table. She felt the vibrations of their hunger, turned to the vibrations of their fear. She remembered the dirt floor that had taken her mother's heat. She remembered the old woman's whisper, "This child carries poison inside." She had carried it far. She had measured it well. One of them tried prayer. The name he called tasted wrong in this house. His fingers scratched his collar until skin gave. Another clawed at his own tongue, as if he could pluck the leaf from it, but the leaf had already become river. Master Roland sagged sideways. His cheek pressed against the table. His breath came like a horse refusing the bit. He lifted his eyes to her. There was not mercy in them, not plea, only surprise that the world had kept a thing from him. "Look," Hannah said, as if pointing a child to his lesson. He did. He saw his men scatter like broken tools. He saw his hand, useless. He saw the candles leaning toward the window and the dark outside, patient as a field. He saw her. He tried to speak her name. He did not know it. His chest made a small, stubborn motion, as though there were still an order in him that could be obeyed. Then it didn't. He coughed one last time, and the foam in his mouth trembled, then stilled. The table stopped trembling. The room learned quiet. For a moment, nothing moved but fire. The wick's blue core held steady. The yellow brim shook and calmed. The wind at the window inhaled the sweet rot and gave nothing back. Hannah gathered the plates that had not shattered. She stacked them carefully on the sideboard. She righted one chair, left the others. She wiped the rim of a cup where a mouth had labored. She set the cloth straight with 2 smooth passes. The acts were small, exact, as she had always performed them. Only now the world into which she performed them had changed. The house was still a house. It had simply admitted a truth. She stepped out of her shoes, skinned a plank. Cold met foot. She crossed the threshold and entered the yard. The night smelled of river mud and pine sap and distant smoke. Above, the moon held its thin blade. She lifted her face to it and breathed as if lungs had been invented for this one use. "I remembered," she said to the dark. "I waited," said the wind in the cane. "Not as property," she whispered. "As a woman." The quarters were quiet, but not asleep. Eyes watched through cracks. Saw her shape in the yard. Saw that she walked not as a thief, but as the owner of her breath. No one spoke her name. The earth said it for them, in the way it accepted her prince. Behind her, the dining room was a museum of ends. Candles unmelting. Cups gone to stillness. Knives lying dumb among bones. The master's ring, gold, thick, engraved with a crest that had meant obedience, rolled slowly from the edge of the table, reached the brink, hesitated as a consulting habit, and dropped. It struck the floor, spun like a small world losing balance, and fell flat. Hannah did not turn at the sound. She walked to the well. The rope burned her palm in a way that felt like beginning. She drew water and poured it over her hands until bitter washed the numb. The sky accepted the steam. The yard accepted the wet. Her hands cooled. Somewhere a hound found the scent of the room's truth and would not enter. Somewhere a cricket forgot its measure. Somewhere a child sat up, sensing that a hinge had opened in the night, and the door would never fit the same again. Barefoot, Hannah crossed the yard at the gate, touched its rough board, and left it closed. Freedom did not always mean running. Sometimes it meant standing, facing the house that had made your silence, and letting it see you breathe without it. Candles and corpses remained. Breath and moonlight did too. She stood between them, steady as a ledger line in a book that could not be burned. Dawn came pale and late, as if the sun itself hesitated to enter the Rowland house. The kitchen was cold. The fire had collapsed to a red breath, and the dining room smelled of sugar turned to rot. A stable boy pushed the door and froze. Candles guttered in cups of amber tallow. Flies had already begun their small black hymns. 10 men sprawled like fallen tools. And at the head, the master, face pressed of linen, foam dried to a cruel lace. The boy backed out and ran, but the morning could not be outrun. It spread. The overseers' wives arrived first, shawls clutched, mouths readying prayers that fled at the sight. Then cousins, then deputies. Boots skidded on rum, halted against stillness. Men who had been loud in life were quiet now, and that quiet frightened the living more than any scream. In the doorway, a deputy crossed himself where no god had entered before. "Where's the girl?" someone asked. "Which?" another said, though they all knew. They searched the kitchen, traces of order where chaos should have been. Platters stacked on the sideboard, 3 plates wiped clean as bone, a window unlatched to the honest air. The well bucket was damp. A single wet print marked the stoop, toes like petals, heel like a seal. Then nothing. Men fanned to the yard with guns that trembled. The cane field leaned and did not answer. The swamp behind the property opened its mouth and breathed old green secrecy. Dogs took the scent of the dining room door, crept to the threshold of the backyard, reached the gate and stopped. No howl, no bay. They whined and looked away, as if the scent crossed a line they had been born fearing. The quarter doors cracked. Faces watched. No one spoke. A deputy stormed in, dragnet of questions ready, but the silencer had learned to live without air. He left angry at the weight in his lungs. By noon, a coroner with soft hands and a hard pen arrived. He touched wrists, found only the obedience of flesh to time. On his form he wrote what he could stand to believe. Apoplexy, drink, misadventure. But the word that lived in the room wrote itself into his bones. He would taste bitter at the back of his mouth for a week and never blame the air. A minister crossed himself against the table. Evil, he said to the cloth, to the knives, to the ring that lay where it fell. Evil did this. Someone lifted the ring, thick as a small shackle, engraved with a crest that represented 100 stolen names. It slipped from the man's fingers, rolled a slow circle, and rested against a chair leg. The minister looked away. He did not understand that metal refuses to hold a house after the breath leaves it. By evening, blame required a body. They took 3 men from the quarters, an old cartwright, a boy with eyes too bright, a father known to sing at night, and dragged them to the porch as if rope could argue with fact. They asked for Hannah's name from mouths that had never used it before. No answer. They raised fists. Silence. They raised whips. Silence answered back, heavier than leather. And when they finally lowered the ropes, all that had changed was the shape of the day. Cruelty had simply put on its regular clothes. That night, lanterns bobbed like frightened stars along the swamp edge. Men called each other, cursed vines, drowned their fear in orders. The water took their curses and smoothed them. One swore he saw a figure at the far bend, bareheaded, moving through cypress knees as if she had always known how. He fired. The sound died against moss. In the morning, they found only footprint of crane and raccoon, a scatter of crushed trumpet vine, and a scrap of gray cloth that smelled faintly of smoke and rosemary. In the city, news moved with the speed of appetite. Thanksgiving had eaten masters. Charleston's parlors churned rumor into story, story into panic, panic into law. Curfews tightened, punishments sharpened, recipes questioned. In kitchens where women stirred grits with wooden spoons, the air tasted suddenly of accusation. Men who had never washed a cup began to watch cups. They sniffed, they sipped, they demanded that water taste like control again. It did not. Roland's cousins arrived with lawyers and measuring tapes. They opened ledgers and found pages damp at the edges, as if a tide had touched them. The plantation's name had always been loud. Now it echoed. Acres changed hands. Debts uncoiled. A will was read to a room that could not stop staring at a stain in the shape of a hand. The cousins left with fewer assurances than they brought. Winter pressed down. The fields went to stubble. The quarters learned a new ceremony, the counting of absence. At night, a kettle boiled for longer than necessary, lid rattling like a restless tooth. A woman hummed a tune that had no comfort in it, only endurance. The old midwife sat by the door and watched the open world, waiting for a figure she had named at birth and expected at last light. No figure came. She nodded anyway, as if to say that vanishing itself can be a kind of return. Years carried the story like a lamp cupped against wind. Some swore Hannah walked into the swamp and was adopted by its water. She learned to sink when men's voices came and to breathe through a reed until they left. Others said she moved along riverways, cooking for camp kitchens and leaving behind men who died smiling, grateful for sweetness. One woman swore she saw Hannah standing waist-deep in the Edisto, hair slicked back, hands raised to the moon as if she were measuring it for a recipe. Another told her child, "If you see a woman with eyes quiet as ash, you thank her and look down. She is passing." Consequences did not end with bodies. Trials came, useless and loud. A magistrate pounded his desk and sentenced heir. He ordered a scapegoat and got a shadow. He wrote his verdicts on paper that turned brittle by summer. When the cousins tried to sell the property, buyers walked through the dining room and could not stop clearing their throats. The house kept its own testimony. Every breath inside it seemed to hesitate, as if unsure which side of history it served. The book beneath Celia's shelf disappeared. No deputy found it. No cousin lifted the right board. But 20 years later, in a house far from the river, a widow sorting trunks for sale opened a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, she found a leather volume with pages brown to the color of tea. The ink smelled faintly of smoke and bay. Recipes, measures, remedies that sounded like spells and spells that disguised themselves as recipes. At the margin of one page, in a hand thin as wire, seeds, wine, and salt. Hide it under the skin and wait for night. The widow closed the book as if it might continue writing without her. In the 1920s, a notebook surfaced in a junk shop behind a church. Its cover was torn. Its spine spoke of many hands. On the last page, beside a clean, deliberate line, a sentence. I remembered. No signature. The seller said it came from a box marked green. The buyer, a woman who taught school and collected rumors the way others collected china, read the line aloud, then bought the box and went home without bargaining. Roland's name, once carved into lintels, softened with weather. Vandals came at night and pried letters loose like rotten teeth. They are hung by a nail until a storm took it. Children played with the O, rolling it along the road until it knocked against a stone and split. The cousins tried to restore the crest. The crest refused. In the quarters where only foundations remained, women told girls a story that had learned to walk on its own. They did not name Hannah. They did not need to. They spoke of a birth that began with blood, a kitchen that taught a second alphabet, a night that remembered everything and finally spoke. Their voices were not joyful. They were heavy with the knowledge that justice, when it comes, does not sing. It counts. Near the river, a ring lies somewhere in mud, gold asleep beside roots. Sometimes after flood, something gleams at the bank, and a child runs to it. But it is only mica or a bottle lip or the laugh of sun on water. The real ring is deeper, where fingers cannot find, buried away a name is buried when memory chooses truth instead. Years will fold and unfold. New houses will rise where the old burned in silence. Papers will be written, footnotes arranged. The legend will not ask for permission to enter. It will arrive the way night arrives, steadily, accomplished, already inside the room. I remembered, not as property, as a woman. Wait for night. In the end, what fell to rolling table were not only bodies, but a grammar. The house had taught how power is spoken. The night taught how it can be unlearned. The pages that carried the family name curled and blackened in damp trunks until only ash remembered their order. The names themselves, Roland, cousin, overseer, became sounds that did not carry weight in mouths anymore. The story keeps what the ledgers could not. A girl born in silence, a kitchen that kept a book, a feast that confessed its crimes by dying, and a path that vanishes at the gate because the person who walked it did not need a road. Her name burns less brightly than her absence. That is how legends live. That is how justice travels, without footprints, without apology, carrying only what can't be taken. The memory that outlasts the name.